I have to acknowledge the fact that there is a certain amount of wishful thinking that's been on my part in terms of a lot of the App Store stuff, which is, I would say a lot of my App Store angst is rooted in the iPad in particular. I feel the iPad is a failure in that it's very successful. It's a very large business. If it stood on its own, it'd be like a Fortune 10 or a Fortune 20 or Fortune 50 business or something like that. It's the amount of money Apple makes is just sort of hard to comprehend, and the iPad is in there.
I had no idea it was that scale of a success, but that's great. I love my iPad.
Well, but what do you use it for?
Watching TV and reading.
Right. That's it. Right. Like that's also
ambitious. Yeah.
Yeah. I use it for two things. I use it to, I sometimes use it to watch TV, but actually I usually don't because I forget to plug it in and then the charge runs down. And by the time I want to use it, I haven't used it for a week and then it has no charge. And I go plug it in and then I watch on my phone. That's actually what but when I do consume it, it is nice to watch video on it. And then I, do drawings on trajectory for it. And, that's great. It's a capability that is nice to exist, but it always felt like such sort of like a missed opportunity in that when it came out, the possibilities sort of seemed endless. Sort of have this device that by virtue of the app approach becomes whatever it becomes whatever you want it to be. Just like your phone becomes a camera, becomes a calculator, whatever the app is on there, that the phone becomes that. And Apple's vision for this sort of, keyboardless, all screen device was so forward thinking, and developers need to acknowledge was such a boon for them. And I wanted that for the iPad. And the problem is when the iPad came out in 2010, it was already becoming kind of clear that particularly for like productivity applications, the sort of applications that I loved on the Mac that were like very like niche specific, like we use like Rogue Amoeba's like audio hijack stuff and all this, like all these sort of applications that are remarkably complex, remarkably powerful, and they can survive with relatively few customers because they can charge $50, $100, whatever it be per seat, and then they can work on it and they can release a new one and you can buy an upgrade, right? And you have your built-in audience that you keep sort of monetizing over time. And when the iPad, came out, subscriptions did not exist as, Microsoft and Adobe were doing them, but Apple didn't support them in the App Store. They never supported them until like 2016. And it was becoming clear on the iPhone that particularly if you couldn't retain your own customers or monetize your own customers through something like a paid upgrade, for example, or have sort of a trial, and you had this marketplace that brought everyone to the game, to go back to our bit about sort of mediums, it brought lots of developers, but that also meant there was a real rush to zero, right? Like you had all this competition and prices went to nothing, and you ended up with a lot of apps that were useful, but you didn't get these Photoshop for the Mac level sort of apps, ones that made the platform, that made it super powerful. And I've always sort of bemoaned that. And it felt like the iPad never really got that class of applications beyond some drawing apps, which again, you could do on a Wacom tablet or something else that was like, wow, this is incredible. Having this device is like I will pay $1,000 to have this app. Now,
right.
For some folks that does exist. Like my daughter is an artist and she has her iPad with her all the time and she uses Procreate and it's incredible and it's an amazing app. And I hope to God they're doing well financially because it is very important to her. And so but all that, even then, that's all downstream from Apple introducing the stylus, which didn't happen until I think that was also maybe the 2016, 2017 era. Right. And so you had this, particularly this first 5 or 6 years, I just found it a bummer. Like there seemed to be so much potential for this device, but that potential had to be discovered, and it needed to be discovered by a team of developers going in and creating something that had never existed before. But it was already clear by the time it came out that that was financial suicide. You couldn't get a team together, spend a long time figuring something out, launching it, knowing that if you could just acquire a few 100,000 customers or whatever the number might be, and then charge them consistently over time, you could make a lot of money. Now, again, Apple has closed some of these holes. There are now subscriptions for software on the App Store. That is a big improvement, but that landed for apps like years after the iPad launch. The stylus has made it better. That still took years after the iPad launch. And could there have been more in the meantime? I would like to think so. But there is a hole in my argument that I'm not articulating what those applications would be, but that's kind of the point is it's very hard to measure what was missed, what didn't get invented.
We didn't invent. Yeah. I mean,
because
I'm
you don't
struggling
know what
too.
it is.
I love using my iPad. When the iPad was released, I thought it was probably stupid. I wasn't sure why exactly it existed. And then you use it and you're like, oh my gosh, I love using this. And so the joy of use brought me back year after year, but I'm struggling to imagine what other sort of applications could make it more of a mainstay in my daily life, given its size, given the ease of use with the iPhone and how central iPhones and Mac laptops are. And so, yeah, I want to agree with you, but I'm sitting here thinking, I wonder what kind of applications it would have in my daily life that would crowd out the amount I'm using other Apple products.
Right. And so maybe it's exactly what it should be. It's mostly a video watching device for most people. Maybe they play games on it. And if you're an artist, you can draw on it. Maybe that's all. Yeah. Maybe that's all it should be. And again, just to be clear, objectively speaking, it is a success, but I've always felt it could have been more. And I've always felt a little twinge of disappointment that it wasn't more. One of my favorite Steve Jobs keynotes ever it was his second to last keynote before he, unfortunately passed away. And he introduced GarageBand. It was the launch of the iPad 2. And, Steve Jobs had always had it as sort of a guiding principle, the sort of computer for the rest of us, the bicycle for the mind, this idea that this could be this device that rushed forward. And when they did the demonstration of GarageBand 2, and you could make music and you could play the drums by actually tapping on them, and you had this powerful sort of recorder. And I was so excited. And then that's the only time I ever lined up at an Apple store, because I was actually getting on a flight that night to come back to Taiwan. And I went there and I got the iPad and I sat on the plane for 14 hours and I created like 3 songs. And I bought my first Mac because of the original GarageBand. I really wanted to sort of make music. And of course, I have no pretensions of actually being sort of, releasing it or anything like that, but it was so fun. It was great. And when that demo ended, it's a very poignant clip, in part because Jobs probably knew, and he didn't look good. And he probably knew it was like getting down to months. I think he would die sort of like 6 months later. And he's just at the end, he's like, how about that? Anyone can make music. And he was so not wistful, but like accomplished. That was what he wanted. And I look at something like even that GarageBand for the iPad at that time was such an engineering effort. It took so much work to build something like that. And you know what? Maybe Apple looks at the numbers and maybe GarageBand for iPad hasn't been used much at all. And so even they realized it wasn't worth it. I don't know. I don't know what the numbers are, but it's not like we got a bunch of other GarageBand type of applications for the iPad in the way that I hoped we would. And I put that on the App Store. There just wasn't a way to monetize, to build a business because of the rules that were in place, particularly at that time. Now, again, like I said, it's better in terms of subscriptions are supported now, but in a competitive marketplace, it would not have taken 5 or 6 years for subscriptions to be supported. If you could link out to the web, you could have supported subscriptions from the beginning. You could have supported paid upgrades from the beginning. And this is, and so my frustration is what stuff's not happening because of business limitations. The capability is incredible, but there's so much restriction. You need a business model for all this stuff to work.